Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm here to bring you week 3 of my 2019 reading year. Just like the rest of the weeks so far this year, this week has been a great reading week. I finished 3 very good books. The first book I finished was The Valley of Fear by Sir Conan Arthur Doyle. This is a Sherlock Holmes novella. Generally speaking, I really enjoy the Sherlock Holmes short stories, although the novellas are a little bit less my style. I think Doyle's really good at the short story format, but the longer he goes, I think the less he's comfortable with making a story, and he tends to, in his novella length stories, actually have multiple stories, and that was the case in this as well. So in The Valley of Fear, the first half of the novella takes place in England with Sherlock Holmes investigating the murder of an American. And the second half of the story takes place 20 years, I think, prior in America when the person who was murdered was young. And it's kind of the backstory of that character. And I really liked the part with Sherlock Holmes. That was very much on par with the other Sherlock Holmes stories where Sherlock is, wandering around, gathering clues, being very mysterious, and Watson is trying to figure out what's going on and having no idea. But the second half was almost as if Doyle thought, hey, I want to write a Western or a gangster story, and so he created one. He just had a Western gangster story, and it was really actually very violent. It was much more violent than I expect from a Sherlock Holmes story. My husband reads me these at night as a bedtime story. We're trying to go through all of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and a couple times I had to stop him and say, you know what, maybe we're not going to read this right now because it's just getting a little violent, which isn't the way I think of these stories, but this one was. Even so, the story was very engaging, and I, was very interested to see what happened and learn about the characters. So it was a good story, just maybe not quite as much my style as some of the other Sherlock Holmes stories. Overall, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The second book I finished was also a little bit violent, but it was so good. This book was Bright We Burn by Kiersten White, and this is the final book in a trilogy that began with And I Darken, which is a sort of Vladimir the Impaler, so Dracula, retelling, based very firmly in historical events, but a YA retelling with a female Vlad, so she's called Lada. This series was something that I got into because my cousin Jade at Bedtime Bookworms, who I'll link below, had read the first book and enjoyed it, and so I'd gotten into the series, and I'm very glad that I did. This book especially wrapped up the series so well and was so interesting. The premise of the series is that there is a girl, Lada, who is the daughter of a ruler of a country called Wallachia in Eastern Europe that is controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And she has a younger brother, Radu, and the two of them are given to the Ottoman Empire, to the Sultan, to sort of keep as a promise that their father wouldn't rebel against the Ottoman Empire. And they grow up partially in Wallachia and then partially in the Ottoman Empire, and throughout the course of the first and second books, they're kind of dealing with these torn loyalties between the two countries, between their homeland and their adopted land. And Lada is this very violent person. She is willing to fight anybody and anything to get what she wants and what she thinks should be done, and she's all about the independence of Wallachia. She doesn't really care about people so much, she cares about her country. Radu, on the other hand, is this very gentle soul, just wants peace, wants everybody to get along, and is very sweet and very vulnerable. So they've got a very interesting dynamic. They don't always get along, but at the same time, they are each other's support system. So in the previous 2 books, they had both grown up, and Lada had gone back to Wallachia to become the leader of Wallachia, and Radu had stayed in the Ottoman Empire to assist the Sultan. And especially in the second book, they went through a lot of trials. taking control of a country was not easy for Lotte. She didn't have a lot of support. There was a lot of betrayal and just a lot of war and violence. For Radu, he was tasked by the emperor, by the sultan, to go and retake Constantinople, and that was a very difficult task for him. He's peace-loving, and this was a lot of war and a lot of very difficult things. So both of them, coming into this third book, have experienced a lot of difficulties and are trying to figure out how to move forward in their lives. And this third book was amazing because not only was it just so gripping in terms of the action that happened, but in terms of their growth as characters. Lotte, who has been just this fighter her whole life, just fighting against anybody and willing to take anybody out, is starting to realize that her willingness to sacrifice anything and do anything has such huge costs for not just her, but for her country as well. And she starts to feel the pain of those losses and question what she's doing. Radu, on the other hand, who's been all about peace and just really hates to be involved in these wars, starts seeing the cost of being a pacifist, the cost of not stepping in and taking action, and starts to think maybe sometimes it's important that he does stand up for things and does do what he thinks is right. And so both of them are really experiencing a lot of growth into adults, which I think is one of the cool things about YA, where you get to see that development of people into adulthood and those hard choices that have to be made. So I absolutely loved this book. I thought the history was so interesting. I'm not familiar with the Ottoman Empire, and I thought that the character development was amazing. The sibling relationship was so complicated and so interesting, and just the internal development of these characters was awesome. It was very, very interesting and great to read. So I highly recommend this series. I think that the first book I only gave 4 stars, it's still a good rating, but I wasn't in love with it. And then the second book in the series I had given 4.5 stars. This book, though, I clearly absolutely adored, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The last book I finished this week was Exit Strategy by Martha Wells, which is the 4th and final novella in the Murderbot Diaries series. And yes, this is another book that I finished reading out loud to my husband as a reread, and just as all the others, I absolutely loved it. I thought that it was a really nice conclusion to the series. It was such a great completion of the story arc in terms of the evil corporation, which was doing all of these very bad things that Murderbot was trying to collect evidence for, so kind of bringing that story arc to a close, while also reuniting Murderbot with the characters from the first book, Dr. Mensa and the rest of the crew, who sort of became its as clients, but really it's more of a found family. And as always, I love Murderbot's development over the course of this series, and in this book in particular, into more of an adult and somebody who can handle its own emotions. And especially being reunited with this found family causes Murderbot to really think through some things of, how to handle that kind of caring about other people and those people caring about you. So that was very interesting to watch Murderbot deal with those feelings. And now it has sort of completed the story arc, and it has to decide what it wants out of life, what it values, what it wants to do, what it kind of wants to be when it grows up. So I'm super excited because I believe that there is going to be a novel-length book about Murderbot that comes out in 2020. So that will be really interesting to read and see, well, what does Murderbot do when it grows up? So as always, I love this series, I love this book, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So that's it for me for this week. If any of you have read any of these books, go ahead and let me know in the comments below what you thought. I'd be very interested to see.